Hey there, welcome back to Badass Messaging. We're still in Module 5, Product Messaging, and here in Lesson 5, we're talking about price anchoring. Now, the truth bomb here is that if you want people to buy your product or service, you have to convince them that it's worth more to them than it will cost. In other words, the value to them has to be more than what it's going to cost them to pay you for the product or service. So you got to create that impression. That's what we're talking about here in this price anchoring, is how do you do that? So here in Lesson 5, we're going to quickly talk about two things. First, why putting made up values on a product or service is just dumb, and how you should be creating a real value anchor instead. We're going to talk about each one of those in turn. Again, this is a quick lesson, but I want you to understand it. So let's talk about a price anchor idea to start with. It comes down to this. People want to feel like they're getting a good deal. And so you want to use a price anchor to show that your product's value is more than its price. A price anchor is really any higher number price that you can use to show the value of your product to kind of make this point, okay? Now, the problem is that what most people are doing is using this, quote, valued at. But it's really one of the most ridiculous things that people do. They pick a number out of thin air and say their product or part of their product is valued at that amount. You'll see this often when people are selling in the online space where, they do it for each thing. They say, well, if it's a course, the modules, the core course is valued at blah, and then the Facebook group is valued at blank, and the bonus is valued at, and all of those numbers they pulled out of thin air to say that's what they're valued at. Well, I've got a piece of news for you. There is literally no economic theory under which a value is something you pull out of thin air. It just doesn't exist. Calling something valued at is completely made up, and people know it. People understand that. So it's not a real number. But there's a second level problem. People are teaching you to do this to come up with a value that's significantly higher than what you're charging because, again, you want to create that impression that they're getting a good deal. The problem, of course, is that randomly saying your offer is valued at some multiple of the price right before you ask for a sale is really monumentally dumb. And here's why. You're destroying your credibility right when you want them to trust you the most. Again, because you're just telling them, oh, this product is worth 10 times what I'm going to charge you for it. And you give them no basis to conclude that. You simply make it up. And so when you do that, they're like, if it were really worth 10 times as much, you probably would be charging me a lot more, because people aren't going to believe you're going to give it to them at 90% off the value. And so you're losing that trust. Now, it's a subtle thing. It's a subtle subconscious thing, but people literally do this right before they're going to ask for money. And I think it's one of the worst tactics because you are undermining your trust, even if just subconsciously with people. So instead of pulling a value out of thin air, find a real price anchor. This is the important piece of this messaging here. You need to find a real price anchor and be able to talk about it. So let's talk about some possible price anchors you could use. One thing you could compare to is like a higher touch service for scaled programs, for courses, for group coaching, for a membership, for anything like that. You can anchor with the cost, the done for you price. What would it cost them to get someone to do this for them? That's an obvious price anchor. For example, for my legal templates, I compare the cost of my legal template package to hiring me to create the agreements from scratch. I have an email that I used to send when I would do promotions of it, where I think the subject line was, do you want to send my family on a European vacation? And I highlight the fact that if someone wanted to hire me to create the templates that they're going to get as part of this pack to do the entire thing, it would cost $5,000 or $10,000 if they wanted to hire me to do it and write it from scratch, so I could take a luxury European vacation on them. And again, that's not making up a number. They inherently know that's true, that to hire me as a lawyer would be very expensive. So I'm highlighting that instead of paying me that, they can buy templates, put in a little bit of work themselves, and get it for considerably cheaper. So again, it's a real price anchor, one that doesn't feel made up. They're like, oh yeah, well, that makes sense because I'm comparing it to an alternative. Now, another way to do it is to talk about the cost of inaction. If doing nothing will cost them money or puts them at risk of having to pay money now or in the long term, you can anchor to that value. So you don't have to make up a real number, but you could say that literally avoiding one blank of whatever your product or service will help them avoid will more than pay for the price. Like, that's a way to do it. So in my case, I had an email in my legal template sale package where I would compare the cost of my legal template pack to the cost of issuing refunds, which might happen if you don't have an agreement. And I had a real example of someone who had to pay a significant amount in a refund because they didn't have an agreement in place. So I was able to use a real example of someone having a real cost because they didn't take action and presenting my templates as a solution. So again, nothing made up. And people see that and they say, okay, that makes sense. So those are ways that you can do real price anchors. And that's what you need to be doing for your price anchor messaging. So the takeaway here, instead of creating valued at figure that no one will believe, find a real price anchor that is believable and will highlight the value of your product or service. This is an important part of messaging, so make sure you do the work to find a real price anchor that you can use and you can kind of, describe the value here. So, the kind of takeaway, the call to action is to identify potential price anchors for each product or service and make sure that you have them because you're going to need them in the sales process. That's it.